Okay, good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening, wherever you are. It's just gone 2 o'clock here in the UK. Little bits happened in the NRL, in the world of the NRL. Two clubs have been hit with fines in regards to their roster management and a salary cap breach. So we've got two roster management breaches, and one of them is a salary cap. Of course, the Sydney Roosters breached the salary cap in 2024. They were over the cap with just over 38,000 Australian dollars over the salary cap in regards to their supplementary and training list players. That basically means those on training trials and those on New South Wales Cup and below in their developmental system. They were hit with a $36,000 fine. Now they can appeal that. The NRL has given the Sydney Roosters time to appeal that punishment, extra time because of the Christmas festivities. Obviously, it's Christmas in a week's time, so the Sydney Roosters have been given a fine for that breach notice. The Melbourne Storm have also been fined around $20,000 for a breach, two separate breaches this season in regards to roster management issues that relate again to their supplementary and training lists and when players were brought up. Promoted from State Cup into the Elite 30 and used as injury and origin cover. So, two bits of basically minor admin. The Sydney Roosters are a little bit more serious. Now, the salary cap breach itself that they have been found guilty of is a very minor breach in the real grand scheme of things in comparison to some of the other salary cap breaches that we have seen over the years. Not on the same scale as Parramatta, Melbourne, or Canterbury, but it's still a reasonable breach. It's wouldn't be the NRL off season without some kind of drama. And of course, obviously, the West Tigers have been dominating the NRL headlines in regards to off-field dramas this off season. It's going to be interesting, obviously, in the lead up to the opening weekend in Vegas and then the full opening weekend at the beginning of March. There's still some player movement that's going to occur. There's still some players that will probably either get an early release from their contracts if they're due to sign for the 2027 season, that potentially could sign early. There's still going to be some player movement, and we'll get into the season previews in the days to come. Obviously, as the pre-season continues, it'll be very, very interesting to see, what the starting rosters look like for opening weekend. But there's still the potential for more player movement. In rugby league news over here in the UK, Featherstone Rovers, again, it's been reported that players have gone unpaid for 3 months. And there are calls for the RFL to step in and pay the players. They did so for Salford at points this last season when player payments and non-playing staff were going unpaid. The RFL stepped up to ensure wages were paid. And there's a lot of criticism that the RFL haven't done so over the last 3 months of the season to ensure that players were paid their full salaries that they are owed, and also the non-playing staff. Now, the administrators have been called in. There is a winding up petition that has been going through the High Court from HM Revenue and Customs. The fact that it's looking very, very similar in the situation that we saw at Salford makes me very, very concerned about the future of Featherstone Rovers and whether they're going to be able to put a team on the field come early February when the rugby league season officially gets underway over here in the UK and, well, in Europe, because obviously we've got French clubs in the structure as well. But it's very, very concerning that administrators have been called in and that there is a winding up order petition going through the High Court on the civil side of things to try and reclaim not only the taxpayer money, but also there are other people who are obviously trying to get their credit, get their owed money as creditors. And that could be a variety of companies, and it can also be ex-players. These players, some players have left the club and have left the club being owed money. So that's going to be very, very interesting. PSG have been ordered by a court to pay Mbappe outstanding wages as well of £52 million, or about 55 million euros in backdated pay that he's been owed. Obviously, he played last season He's obviously left PSG. He's now a Real Madrid player. PSG have been ordered to pay him his outstanding wages. There was a dispute between Mbappe and the club over unpaid wages and bonuses, and they've been ordered to pay him that money. Really interesting that the PSG, with Qatar as the nation state, and obviously the bottomless pit of wealth that PSG have, that they're unable to pay the players and pay the players in full. So obviously he was successful in bringing that civil suit. He was arguing that he hadn't been paid all his full wage packet and playing bonuses whilst under contract at the club. And the club have been ordered to pay him outstanding wages, which raises a few eyebrows about the financial situation, not only in French football, but for PSG. That's been a big headline maker in the world of sport, is that they've been ordered to do so. That's going to be very interesting how that plays out. Unpaid wages is a big thing. You know, that we've seen this before where players have moved on from a club and then they are still owed money. And there's an ongoing legal battle. So it's going to be interesting if they do pay that in full or if they appeal. But it seems to be that they weren't paying him properly, and that's very interesting. This is obviously PSG, one of the wealthiest clubs, well, with some of the wealthiest owners in the world, and it seems that they're not paying their players in full, which does raise some questions about what's going on behind the scenes at PSG and in the French league, and the viability of the French league. We have seen over the years the financial struggles that the game in France is facing. And obviously, we've seen the issues that have beset Bordeaux and Lyon in the last couple of seasons with their financial struggles. And the warning signs have been there in French football for some time. The TV deal collapsing a few years ago, and the French domestic league not being able to find a broadcast partner, both domestic and international, a decent enough broadcast partner to fill the void following the collapse of the previous deal. It's very, very concerning that the French league is more reliant on fans buying tickets and going to games and buying merchandise, so basically fans in attendance, than some of the other major leagues in Europe that are considered the big five or big six. If you count the Dutch league and the Portuguese league, maybe the big seven. They are more reliant on fans going through the turnstiles and buying tickets and going to games because of that lack of TV revenue. They're also the way French sport works in regards to the sponsorship, the TV money, and how fandom is distributed and how funds coming into professional sport in France. It's a very different pie chart than the rest of Europe in regards to who watches what TV companies, broadcasters, advertisers, sponsors, investors, where the money goes. It's a very even split of the pie chart. If it was to be a bar graph or a pie chart, most of the bars or slices would be pretty equal in size. It's a very interesting sports market in France when it comes to professional sport and where fans are willing to put their money and where they're willing to spend their money. And so therefore the fact they don't have a strong domestic and international TV deal really hurts the league and hurts the clubs. They make less money. They can't afford the same wages that other leagues can, and they can't afford the transfers that other leagues can. And because there's that lack of exposure, and only one club really can sign the superstar players these days, which is PSG. It's very, very hard to attract new talent. It's very, very hard to retain talent. And it's very, very hard to attract further investment into the league when it struggles financially, domestically with PSG dominating financially, but also on an international stage, it's harder for them to attract the talent and retain the talent and also develop the talent. Other leagues have been poaching French players through youth systems for a long time. And most of the top French players don't play in France, and that's been a fact for a good 2 to 3 decades. And that trend is going to continue unless Liga and the French Football Federation can secure a better TV deal. These clubs are going to continue to struggle, in regards to player recruitment, player retention, and exposure. And so it's also summed up by the relative lack of success of French clubs when it comes to the European club competitions. Only two clubs have won the Champions League, that's Marseille and PSG, and they've struggled in the other European competitions. Yes, French clubs have made finals and semi-finals. AS Monaco made the final of the Champions League, obviously in the early 2000s, but it's that next step of other clubs competing, making finals, winning finals. Doesn't matter if it's the the Conference League or the Europa League, and it's increasing the product awareness. If you were to try and sell the game to the Americans and you brought up the French league, they would know PSG, maybe Monaco, potentially Lyon. Off the top of their heads as clubs that they would recognise from Champions League football over the last 20 years. That would be the brand recognition that American fans would have of the product. Flip that on its head, you look at the Italian Serie A, you look at the Bundesliga, you look at the Premier League, Spanish League, Portuguese League, Dutch League, they could probably have better brand recognition with the clubs and know more of the players who play for said clubs than the French League. And that's where, amazingly, somehow France is one of the best nations internationally with how many finals they've made and how many trophies they've won, how competitive they've been, regularly making the latter stages of tournaments. It's amazing that they continue to produce world-class players, but most of those players are developed outside of France or move from the French junior system, clubs junior systems, into bigger clubs across Europe, and it's very hard to retain that talent. Now, the fact that PSG have been ordered to pay Mbappe these outstanding wages, as I say, is a very concerning sign about the state of PSG and what's going on behind the scenes at the club and the structures and the pay structure and why it's taken him this long since leaving the club to get paid the money he's owed. That is really, really interesting. Very interesting. In Major League news, the Pittsburgh Penguins look like they are going to be sold by the Fenway Sports Group to a Chicago-based consortium, an investment consortium based in Chicago, which is very interesting. Now, we don't know, what I haven't seen reporters is whether Mario Lemieux and his small ownership stake is also part of this sale. When the Fenway Sports Group came in a few years ago and bought the Pittsburgh Penguins, they did keep Mario Lemieux as a minority owner and a minority shareholder in the ownership structure of the Penguins, and that his role as one of the public faces of the ownership group would not change. It's very, very interesting that the Fenway Sports Group only have the Pittsburgh Penguins as part of their sporting umbrella for only a handful of years. That is really interesting. Are they going to put the proceeds of this sale back into the Boston Red Sox and Liverpool Football Club? That would be very, very interesting, considering that at various points they've tried to court potential investors in Liverpool, trying to, potentially sell a stake in Liverpool to potential future investors. And there's been some speculation over the budget that they set aside for Liverpool Football Club. And so it's going to be really, really interesting to see what then happens with the Pittsburgh Penguins. There has been issues in the past with the finances of the Penguins in regards to the NHL. Now, the sale is expected to be around 1.3 to 1.7 billion, depending on sources. It's very interesting considering that the NHL is expecting the next round of expansion fees to be 2 billion or higher, that this team has sold for less than that amount of money. Now, the deal hasn't been fully completed. We'll expect an announcement probably in the new year in regards to the ownership change. Of course, when this type of thing happens, obviously, the NHL Board of Governors, that's all the owners, will get around the table with their representatives and say, is this potential takeover good? Is it bad? And they will give the thumbs up or the thumbs down to this. So very interesting that the Fenway Sports Group has decided on this course of action after such a short time of owning the team as the majority shareholders and owners, that they are now selling the team. That in itself is very, very interesting that has taken place. The day-to-day running of the team won't change overly. The team is also now far more financially stable than it was 5, 10, even 15 years ago. There have been issues in the Penguins' existence as a franchise since they joined the NHL of financial struggles. There have been times where the team has struggled financially. Throughout the 80s and into the 90s and early 2000s, there were concerns that the team could be forced to relocate. Mario Lemieux, when he was drafted, helped save the team and keep the team in Pittsburgh initially, and then they win some Stanley Cups with him as a player. And as an owner, they've won. As a minority owner, they've also won Stanley Cups with him involved in the ownership side. But money has always been a massive concern historically with the Penguins. Not so much these days, but there are some years where they do struggle to break even. However, they're not on the same level of financial, concern that they were a decade or two ago when there was real concerns at the beginning of the 2000s, before Marc-Andre Fleury was drafted, and of course Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin were also drafted by the team about 2 decades ago. That ultimately the team could potentially be relocated before financial reasons, not because the team wasn't drawing fans. It's always had good attendance, but it just was not getting runs into the playoffs, was struggling financially, had precarious ownership. So that's really interesting that deal is currently in the process of going through. We'll see when the official announcement is made, when FSG decide to hand over the team to this Chicago-based investment portfolio. It'll be very, very interesting to see how that all plays out. But there's no threat of the team being relocated. They're now established in Pittsburgh. They've won 5 Stanley Cups in the city. The fan base obviously is very, very proud of their team. And the financial instability of the past is a thing of the past. There are now a much more profitable venture, especially with how the NHL is now recording record profits over the last few seasons. And we can debate the pros and cons, obviously, the gambling side of things with that kind of investment and advertising within the sport. But the Pittsburgh Penguins look very likely to have been sold by the Fenway Sports Group. What will be interesting is, following the sale, when it is completed, let's see what happens with Liverpool and the Boston Red Sox. They're the 2 major sporting entities that the Fenway Sports Group has controlling stakes in. And we have seen in recent seasons, obviously, rumours circulating that the Fenway Sports Group were willing to sell a stake in Liverpool Football Club going forward to secure further investment. Of course, Liverpool are obviously struggling this season, so it'll be interesting to see what happens in the regards to Liverpool, but also the Boston Red Sox. It'll be very interesting to see how the Fenway Sports Group, again, with the Boston Red Sox, any potential investment next season in the Red Sox, in their playing roster, and in any potential stadium upgrades that Fenway Park may have. It will be very interesting, again, how their major sports teams, what happens with potential spending and investment, or could they potentially be selling stakes? Could this be a point where the Fenway Sports Group has decided to change direction in how it invests its money and its portfolio of sports teams? It's going to be very, very interesting how that plays out over the coming years. It wasn't that long ago that it was a bit of a shock, should I say, when they decided to purchase a controlling stake in the Pittsburgh Penguins. And yes, they did retain Mario Lemieux in his ownership stake. They allowed him to keep an ownership stake and a say on the day-to-day running of the organisation in the front office, which was very, very important. So there was no change in the day-to-day running of the team. But it's very, very interesting. It's only been about 3 years, and already they're willing to part company with this investment and move on. So that's going to be very interesting to see how that pans out. Now, obviously, in the last couple of days, we've seen FIFA respond to the criticism to their ticketing price, staying in America. Of course, this new lower tier of ticket at $60 has now been announced. Limited numbers of tickets. There is still a lot of backlash there and a lot of debate around the ticket price. I think it's been a PR nightmare for FIFA, but I think this World Cup, when it was announced, there was some eyebrows raised that it was going to be obviously the expanded World Cup, 3 host nations, which has never happened before, and the amount of teams playing and the amount of extra games that are going to be played next summer. I think it is 40 odd. I think it's 40 more games than Qatar. I think the concern that I have is the potential poor attendance. Now, we saw poor attendance at the Club World Cup. Now, people will say, yes, it's a domestic or an international club competition. There was a lot of, I don't think it was particularly well promoted to the viewing audience, TV and the internet here in Europe. I don't think they really promoted it very well and advertised it very well. I think we could all agree on that. I think the fact it was also an expanded competition from the traditional format raised some eyebrows with some fans. The quality of football was very mixed, but there was also concerns about the stadiums being used and weather delays. And one thing that was a takeaway was some of the host cities for that competition, that tournament, the temperatures were very, very high. The humidity was a big problem, and thunderstorms and bad weather. There was a lot of weather delays. Some games were delayed by several hours and suspended. But also the ticket price coming out of that and accessibility at stadiums coming out of that through either via public transportation, even driving, accessibility, for hotels and entertainment districts, and just the overall fan experience. Didn't go down particularly well. There was also issues at the Copa America the year prior, some security problems, ticketing problems, accessibility issues. So again, these are recurring themes that the organisers for next year's World Cup have had basically 2 years to iron out. We haven't seen any test events in Canada or Mexico in that regard, which is also quite concerning. Are Canada and Mexico are going to also be prepared and have that working experience that the US now have? But the ticket price debacle, and it really is, because the leaking of that FIFA document and the publication in the media of that FIFA document from the bidding process, where it actually says how much tickets are going to cost, minimums, ticket prices for group stage and knockout stages, and how they were going to be flat capped across the board at each stage of the tournament until the latter stages, and how far away from those prices we actually are. You can give a little bit of inflation there, but that is a massive own goal by FIFA, considering FIFA itself has had a lot of negative headlines in the build up to the Qatar World Cup, from awarding of the tournament to the FIFA corruption scandal that became very, very public in 2015, all the way through to the Russia World Cup, and then through to the Qatar World Cup in a variety of areas and beyond. And now that we've seen 2 trial tournaments where there have been accessibility issues at stadiums, and there have been ticketing problems and cost problems, empty seats, weather delays, yes, there were some security issues at the Copa America, which really reared their ugly head for the final, which raised a lot of concerns about stadium security. And then obviously we've seen a change in president, and so the political outlook of the US is different on domestic and foreign policy, which has put a lot of people off. And there's been, since the bidding process, we've had a couple of presidential elections in the US. We've also had a change in head of government in Canada and Mexico as well. All 3 heads of state have well, the head of state of Canada is still the king, but all 3 heads of government have changed. And we've seen a lot of geopolitics and economics over the last couple of years following the pandemic, and shutdowns and inflation and cost of living and tariffs. And then there's also the geopolitics of foreign policy and the rhetoric coming out. And we've also seen a drop-off in travel from outside the US inwards. So inwards travel to the US from Europe and South America. Visitor numbers have dropped off significantly. There have been issues with customs at the US in regards to entry, just backlogs and delays. And then you have to look at the prices that the hotels and the airlines and the car rental companies are also potentially going to be charging next summer, which is peak holiday season in the US. There is the potential that this could be the most expensive World Cup for fans of all time in real and actual terms. And then you look at how much it cost for Qatar to build the stadiums, put the tournament on, host all the fans that came over. It's already dwarfing Qatar. Now, the problem I think FIFA have got themselves into is the organisers said that we are going to try and make anywhere between 11 and 15 billion US dollars. Qatar made about 6. Now, Qatar was seen as the most expensive tournament to be hosted up to that point because all the new infrastructure that had to be put in place for the tournament to take place, including building fan zones and stadiums from scratch. Whereas the US, not a single stadium has been built specifically for this tournament. It's the same with the Olympics in a couple of years' time, is that they're trying to reuse as many facilities that already exist as possible to reduce the initial cost of getting the tournament up and running. Now, yes, there are admin costs and running costs that you are going to incur at a tournament. There is the advertising cost of promoting the tournament. Yes, these things will exist. They will happen. But in all seriousness, and all jokes aside, the stadiums are already in place. So that infrastructure is already there. But it's the public transport infrastructure that I think is part of the problem in America. There is issues with the public transportation. And some of the stadiums are not conveniently located nearby airports or hotels or downtowns of cities or the metros in which these stadiums are in. Whereas the Canadian stadiums, both Toronto and Canada, are actually very accessible by public transportation, and they're also pretty close to the downtowns of Toronto and Vancouver. The Azteca is an iconic stadium in Mexico, and so is Guadalajara's stadium as well. They're very accessible. Some of the stadiums in some of the US cities are very accessible. Others are less so. And even fans in the US and Canada, there's more fans in Canada that are very shocked by the prices. And of course, you've got the exchange rates. So that's going to be very, very interesting to see if the exchange rates for all the currencies, from the pounds, euros, Canadian dollars, American dollars, Mexican pesos, how much they fluctuate. And so, will it be cheaper for fans to visit? Will it be more expensive? Will their currencies hold their value? All these things, because that will have an impact as well. I wouldn't be surprised if further ticket price debate continues and whether ticket prices will ultimately be reduced or more cheaper tickets made available to fans. The fact there's 40 more games, they're automatically going to make more money. There's a bigger TV audience in the US. And because the US is hosting, I think as a co-host, there's going to be the big networks are really going to push the advertising. The later kickoff times for the European TV market may have a knock-on impact, but it is, again, the peak holiday season. Many people take their annual leave at that time of year. And so there may be more people taking time off work, and it may not impact the TV viewership, but some of the kickoffs for European time, obviously we're 5 to 6 hours ahead of the East Coast, depending on where you are in Europe, it's going to be very, very interesting in that regard, how the viewership figures on TV, because that's one of the things they were very, very concerned about was the European and African TV audiences, and making sure that they could maximize the TV audience and the advertising revenue from Europe, from Africa. They were very, very keen to try and maximize that, but delaying the kickoff times. Some of the kickoff times aren't horrendous, but some of the kickoff times, again, for the European audience, we're talking early hours of the morning, really late at night, between 11 p.m. and 2 to 3 a.m., depending on if it's on the West Coast or East Coast. So there are going to be some issues with, I think, the overall fan viewing experience, those who are not able to go to games in the World Cup. That's going to be very, very interesting. But I'm not overly I think I'm just. I do think the TV audience is going to be very interesting to look at the viewership, especially for the later kickoffs that we are due to see at the tournament. Now, again, there's been threats of fan boycotts over the prices. There have been concerns raised about the potential for the weather conditions to disrupt. And some fans are concerned about the quality of the tournament we're going to see, considering it is an expanded tournament with more teams. There the potential for a lot of lopsided blowout scorelines where one nation just demolishes another nation. There's obviously a fair few debutants. And so there are concerns that the quality of the tournament may not be as good as previous tournaments. Right, let's have a look at some of the sports headlines. Oh dear, more issues impacting England at the Ashes. Not really a lot going on apart from obviously England's struggles in the Ashes in Adelaide at the moment continue. There are issues with the batting lineup. In fact, the lineup in general, I think there's a lot of criticism of the style of play England are playing against Australia. There has been some controversy in regards to Snicko. And obviously the technology when it's looking at potentially an LBW or an edge behind. There's been some controversy there, which is not gone down well. Even Australian cricket fans are a bit bemused by a couple of the decisions given. But overall, I honestly, I think England are looking at potentially a 5-0 defeat, a 5-0 whitewash. Again, it just reminds me of the Pommy shambles of 2007. I do think, however, the team that's playing in this Ashes is a lot weaker than the team that played in 2007. I think the 2007 team maybe celebrated a bit too hard after 2005, got a little bit ahead of themselves and just badly prepared for the Ashes in 07, whereas this team has been badly put together, I think has a flawed style of play, Bazball, which I think is exceptionally flawed, very one-dimensional. There is no plan B, and a lot of pressure has got to be put on the selectors and the leadership within the ECB, within the coaching setup, and with the senior players as part of that leadership group. There's been a failure across the board. And questions do need to be asked of the selectors. I mean, what county championship matches are they watching? Because there's some pretty good county championship batting performances from last season that I definitely really enjoyed watching some of the games in the county championship. Admittedly, they're only 4-day games rather than the 5-day test matches. But there were some really talented batsmen, plying their trade in first-class cricket domestically. And there were some pretty talented bowlers as well, both spin and pace. And yes, the conditions in Australia are significantly different to the conditions over here in the height of summer, although last summer just gone was quite a hot, humid summer, which is what similar conditions to what they're experiencing in Australia right now. But I will say this, overall, I think England have been badly prepared. I think weaknesses have been shown in other test matches that they've played. I think Bazball is a very flawed style of play. I think what we are seeing in Australia is an absolute shambles, and I do mean that. I think it badly prepared team. I think they've very badly prepared for this series. There are issues, I think, with some of the selections. I think the players aren't performing, and we have to look at why we're basically throwing away the third test, which means the series will be lost. There is no way, if they lose or draw this test, there is no way they can win the Ashes if they throw this away with a draw or loss. And they were in a very strong position after the opening day or day and a half, and it's just gone wrong again. And the batting's not good enough. The bowling is variable. I do have concerns about, again, the selection. And there's going to be questions and finger pointing at Rob Key, in his administrative role within the ECB. There's going to be questions about how domestic cricket is structured and why the 100 exists when key players the 100 wanted to sign up to boost the competition were like, we don't want to play, including captain Ben Stokes. Why you've got an ex-captain still in the side in Joe Root, and people have criticised Joe Root at times for some of his captaincy flaws as a captain. There's no doubt he's a very talented batsman and he's a very talented fielder. He's a very talented player. I think he was the wrong person to be named captain when it was his captaincy. I think that really was a responsibility that I don't think suited him. He put too much pressure on him, which did impact his batting really badly and his fielding, and it just didn't sit well with him. If I'm being honest, I think the captaincy was more of a burden for him and really impacted his overall play and some of his decision making as well. I've had my views on Ben Stokes over the years with some of his off-field antics and controversies that he's had earlier in his career. I think he was very, very lucky not to end up in prison in 2017, 2018 when all that happened off the field during the West Indies series on that night out in Bristol and the aftermath of that and the legal action taken. I think Ben Stokes was exceptionally lucky to be charged with a fray and not, for example, GBH or ABH. If he was charged with one of them or common assault, he's more likely getting convicted of something. Alex Hales' career, for example, has never recovered from that particular incident, although Alex Hales himself has had his own controversies. I'm very interested, in how the game, I think, has definitely suffered as a result of the TV deal, and that's been in place since 2005, where no England Test match has been shown live free to air in this country for 20 years. Since the final Ashes Test in 2005, so over 20 years now. That is a very big criticism that I have. That TV deal, I think, has been disastrous for the long-term future of the sport. A whole generation of less well-off kids have been denied access to a great sport that's open to all stratas of society and all backgrounds. You can be working class and you can be upper class, you can be middle class, you can be from an immigrant background, you can be born and bred here, you could have gone to a private school or a state school, doesn't matter. That team that won in 2005 had a bit of everything in it. People from all backgrounds, and abilities. And then the ECB and the broadcasters took it away from us. And I think that's damaged the growth of the game. The World Cup final in 2019 had an average drop-off of peak viewership of around 10 million from peak viewership of the 2005 Ashes. I think that decision by the ECB in 2005 to get the Sky money was very, very short-sighted, and has had long-term damaging consequences for the game. There's been some other controversies since then, which I think have definitely hurt the game. I'm just checking. No messages there. So I do think that there has been over a significant period of time decisions taken at the governing body level that have had negative consequences for the sport. And we want to obviously encourage, more people. Oh, right, that's my phone. More people to take up the sport, watch the sport. More kids to play, more schools to have, more schools and colleges and educational facilities or social clubs or sports clubs to offer it as one of the sports that they offer. Grow the fan base. And it's very hard to do that when the sport is solely behind a paywall and we have very little free-to-air access to the sport. Very little free-to-air access. I think that's a deeply concerning on that part. I think we can do better in that regard. I think that is a big failure on the part of the ECB. I think they've got that wrong. I think they've got the media strategy wrong. I think they have made some mistakes along the way. And this is an organisation that during the first lockdown during COVID was laying off staff and going cap in hand to the government for COVID loans, saying, "We've got no money. Can you help us?" And they were asking for government assistance. And then this is where you have to question where that money has gone since that first TV deal with Sky for all test matches was signed in 2005. Fast forward to now in 2025, we're basically going to lose the third test with the way we're playing. England's batting lineup has struggled. They really have struggled to get runs. Joe Root's obviously got his century, but other players have really struggled to put runs on the board and give the bowling attack something to defend or work with. And yeah, I do fear that this could be a 5-0. And then where do we go from there? Who knows? But I do think English cricket is in deep trouble. Can Ben Stokes retain the captaincy after this? Will Brendan McCullum be the coach after this? Will administrators within the ECB and those in player development and selection, will heads roll there? Or do we continue to reward failure? And in this case, an embarrassing failure. I don't know. I've got a few friends who are cricket fans, and I do think we are the sport's at a crossroads anyway. But this is not a strong Australian side. Yeah, this is what's scary. This is not a strong Australian side. So these are two very poor sides playing, and one side is playing less badly than the other. I think, as I say, if both these sides were put head to head against the 2005 Ashes series teams, they both lose that series 5-0. If the England team was to play Australia and the Australian team to play England from 2005 playing this 2025 set of players, it's a 5-0 whitewash to the 2005 Ashes squads over the 2025 players. I think that's just my opinion of where I think both nations are at with their selections. Australia have shown that they're just not as bad as England. I think that's my assessment of what I've seen. Day one, England actually bowled quite well. They did skittle some wickets out at key times and they showed some fight, but the batting lineup has failed yet again. Another batting collapse. Really poor shot selection. There's players playing with no confidence, and there's players who really have had their opportunities, and maybe someone else like Ollie Pope, I think, is done. Now, whether that's a coaching thing, whether that's a confidence thing, whether that's a technique thing, that's just a natural bad habits that he's got in his game, where he's formed some bad habits. They've got into his game. It's got to a point now where he's that far in his career, it's very hard to eradicate those bad habits. But technique can be worked on and coached on. And that, again, comes to coaching. The batting coaches, the head coach, they need to... Brendan McCullum was a brilliant batsman. Very aggressive, very innovative in his shot selection and how he went after bowling and how he attacked opposition bowlers and went after them and, his shot selection. Ollie Pope's in trouble. His confidence is gone. We can see that. Yeah, I mean, I do think the interviews given by the players and the coaching staff saying we over-prepared is BS. There's no such thing as being over-prepared. There's a thing called being under-prepared and badly prepared. But I don't know where England go with that. Celtic have lost 4 in a row under new manager Wilfred Nancy. And Lewell, the chairman of the board, I believe, has resigned. So Celtic are having a little bit of a crisis up in Scottish football. Much like Rangers, the old firm is really faltering this season. St Mirren obviously winning the League Cup final 3-1. They could have won that 7-1, be honest. St Mirren really pulled Celtic to pieces. I mean, St Mirren played the perfect game, near enough, apart from the goal they conceded, where they just couldn't clear their lines. That one phase of play, they played pretty much the perfect game, and Celtic were poor. But Celtic have been underwhelming, I think, even before Brendan Rodgers left the club. They're on their third manager of the season. If they go for a fourth manager, I think that season done. The fact they've lost 4 in a row, Hearts have built a little bit of a cushion again at the top. Losing that cup final in the manner they did, I think the confidence of the playing group is gone. There's a lot of anger with the Celtic fan base towards the board, and some of it is justified. There's been some poor decisions made. But much like Rangers earlier in the season with Russell Martin and some of the decisions they've taken there in regards to managerial changes and chopping and changing, the old firm is looking vulnerable to a period of lack of success, which I don't think is a bad thing for Scottish football, that someone else wins. I think Scottish football has needed that for a very long time. I think Steve Clarke on the national side of things is starting to really get the players to buy in. The next goal is to qualify from a group at the international tournament, but they've made 3 out of the last 4 tournaments. So I think Scotland are trending in the right direction on the international front. But on the club front, I mean, Celtic and Rangers are in crisis this season. There's fan protests at games, which is just unexpected for Rangers and Celtic. You just don't expect Celtic fans to be protesting the board, the ownership. And they've got too used to winning. And it's time that they actually learn what defeat tastes like, I think. I think it would be good for Scottish football if Hearts were to win the league title. I think it's good for football that St Mirren have won the Scottish League Cup in the manner that they did as well. Probably more of a performance than Partick in the 70s doing the same thing to Celtic. I think it's very, very important that happened. And if Hearts do go on and win the league title, I think that is a seismic shift. And hopefully it's not just a one-off. Hopefully there can be a continuation in regards to other teams competing at the top of the SPL. Dundee United, for example, winning against Celtic for the first time in 11 years. I think that is important. I think it's vitally important that the Scottish League is much more competitive and that multiple teams are challenging for silverware domestically. They still got to do massive improvements on the European side of things, because Scottish clubs in Europe have been dreadful for some time. When they do qualify for group stages, they have been poor and they have struggled. And there's clearly issues with the Scottish game taking that next step. But the story at Hearts, now I've got a good friend who's a Hibs fan. And so obviously there's a little bit of anyone but them. But ultimately, I think it's a good thing. I think this is needed for Scottish football, that this happens. Rangers have shown that they've got massive recruitment problems. I think Celtic have got some recruitment problems now. In the new manager Darcy's case, I mean, he's clearly not getting the message through to the players. They've lost some big games here. They've lost some big games in Europe. Obviously, that defeat in the cup final and 2 defeats in the league in 4. And that is, these are big defeats. They've struggled to score. Defensively, they're struggling as well. I don't think you can always say a good manager's appointed, but it's the wrong manager, wrong club mix. And we've seen it with a number of clubs where the manager's been successful elsewhere, doesn't work, and then they move on to another club and they're successful again. Now, the whole issue with Brendan Rodgers and the breakdown, the relationship between Brendan Rodgers and the board, I think has had a damaging impact. I think that Martin O'Neill, was he the right guy to bring in as interim when he said he was not interested in the permanent role, even though there were many saying he should take it for the rest of the season? He said, no, I'm a short-term fill-in. They've gone with Wilfred Darcy, and it's not working. Now, could he be another manager sacked this season? it will be interesting. Already calls after just 4 games in charge to sack him. I mean, there needs to be a response. There needs to be some kind of, response to what's going on. They are struggling. That's plain and obvious for anyone to see. They're struggling. Things aren't going well. Let's not kid ourselves. It's not a good situation that Celtic are finding themselves in. Now, they're not out the title race yet, but those were some big defeats in the last week or so. These are big defeats in the last couple of weeks. Winless in a long period of time. 4 straight defeats. This is a run of form that's almost unheard of for Celtic. Now, Hearts, should I say, have had their little wobble as well. And the gap did close. Now, Celtic didn't overtake Hearts, but the gap did close. And then Hearts have sort of responded to their short loss of form and got back on, grinding away. If the points gap gets beyond 9 points, I think potentially, if it gets beyond 10, 11 points, I think at that point, I think Celtic are in trouble and in grave danger of not retaining their title. And then, yes, I understand why fans are frustrated with how things have been handled at board level. What is not acceptable is the abuse that certain board members and administrators within the club have faced, including Lewell, who has stood down from his role, citing those security concerns and the threats he's received to himself, his friends, and family. We've also seen this at Rangers as well, where board members at various points in the past have raised concerns about their personal safety following fan protests. And this is an element of Scottish football that continues to be concerning. We've seen this time and time again in Scottish football where we have seen that nasty element. But yeah, Celtic, as I say, Celtic are in a bit of crisis. Off the field, at least, there's clearly dysfunction in the boardroom and dysfunction behind the scenes with the money men and the administrators of the club. And that potentially, when you see these negative headlines, that does impact the players. It does impact the players and what happens on the field. They're not immune to the media noise. It's getting harder and harder to block that media noise out, be it the mainstream or social media. It's getting very, very hard to do that. And, a lot of players in a lot of sports have obviously raised the concerns about the threats and the abuse they receive on social media. And that's going to have an impact. And a lot of players have deleted their social media profiles or their public club-based profiles and just keep their things private with their friends and family. A lot of them have completely turned off social media altogether. And again, there's, I don't blame them. It's become a very toxic space in that regard. And it's definitely a talking point where what is acceptable at protest and what isn't. But Hearts top of the SPL at the moment in a very strong position. Celtic wobbling. Rangers really just such a poor start to the season. While Rangers, their title hopes I think have gone. But then you've got to look at the struggles Scottish clubs have faced in Europe as well. The results when it comes to the Europa League, the Conference League, the Champions League, they are poor. They are poor. Some of the results are really, really poor. And I think that's where some of the frustration is coming from as well with fans, is that they do spend some money, especially Celtic. They've spent some money and then they're just not getting the results in Europe. I mean, Rangers are the last Scottish club to make a European final. In fact, they're the last Scottish club to make 2 European finals on the trot. Losing them both, yes, but they had opportunities to win some European silverware, and they came up short. And apart from those 2 final runs that Rangers have had in the last 2 decades, there hasn't been that success in European competition where the results say, look, we've got out the group stage, we've reached the knockout stage. So Rangers aside, it has been some tough going for Scottish clubs in Europe for some time. And there was a long period of time where Scotland couldn't qualify for a major tournament. Now, there's been some criticism of the style of play Scotland play at times, but I think Steve Clarke is the right guy to take Scotland forward. There's obviously the debate around Thomas Tuchel with England and, again, player selections. And it's very interesting. I mean, Steve Clarke, I think, while he hasn't won trophies he has won trophies as a manager in Scotland, yes. He's only won a handful. But I think his philosophy is a good philosophy. And I think potentially he can do good things with Scotland. I think they should be targeting the knockout stages, getting out the group. And I think that would be classed as a successful tournament for Scotland. I think they've got a lot to build upon. They've, as I say, qualified for 3 of the last 4 major tournaments that they've been eligible for. England, I mean, look, we can all, discuss the pros and cons of Southgate's era. But you look at the win percentage and getting the results and making finals and latter stages of tournaments. The style of football was not easy on the eye. There were some tactical flaws there. There were some, tactical flaws and mistakes made, and some selection decisions that raised some debate. And Thomas Tuchel has come in following Lee Carsley's stint as interim. And I think Lee Carsley started a more positive style of play, implementing. Potentially, I think Carsley was unlucky not to get the job on a full-time basis. But I think that Thomas Tuchel, has carried on that more positive, pragmatic, high-energy approach, and I think it's paying off. England didn't concede a goal in qualifying, which they've never done before, which was an achievement in itself. It's going to be interesting to see who comes out the playoff structure for the remaining 6 World Cup places. That's going to be really interesting to see how the playoff structure works, who qualifies. Now, we've obviously got Republic of Ireland, Wales and Northern Ireland out of the home nations. Italy's a big nation in the playoff structure as well, who could potentially miss out. But I think they've got enough, to get to the World Cup, But we shall see. They've not been playing particularly well. Sweden are a big surprise with me about how they just fell apart in the last international window, how Sweden just fell apart and they've struggled to score goals and they've struggled to defend, and there's a lack of confidence. Currently watching the Dance World Championship, 128 players, day 8 and still in the first round. Did you hear about a player? Yes, I heard about the player who punched the table and did his hand in. I think he split his hand quite badly open, quite badly hurt himself as well. As I say, I got asked the question on the last live stream, am I going to be watching and following the darts? I'm not. I got asked the question about who do I think is going to win. Honestly, I think if Luke Littler wins, I think that's obviously cementing his place as this, the new kid on the block. He's the young, exciting kid on the block, and it's creating discussion. I mean, I compare Luke Littler at this stage in his career to other athletes and sportsmen and women who play in the individual sports. So like tennis players, golf players, snooker players. And I think he has the potential, if he carries on this trajectory and keeps level-headed and keeps himself grounded, he has the potential to do what Tiger Woods did for golf and what Ronnie O'Sullivan and others, but Ronnie O'Sullivan did for snooker and others who followed them. And because of his success so early, he does have that potential to be the Tiger Woods or the Ronnie O'Sullivan of darts. Sometimes you do find that, there are players. So tennis, for example, we've had this great era of Djokovic. Obviously, Federer started it, Nadal, Djokovic, Andy Murray for a little bit, Del Potro obviously floating around a little bit, obviously these knees, Cilic. And now we're getting this next generation of champions coming through now that the the big three or big four and Wawrinka and all that have all retired or retiring or coming to the end of their careers in tennis. We've seen it in women's tennis with Serena Williams being the most dominant player in the women's tour. We've obviously seen it in F1 with Schumacher, then Vettel, then Hamilton in the last 3 decades, really dominating the majority of world championships. And now Max Verstappen is the guy, although Lando Norris is obviously beating him this season, and Piastri was second, but Max Verstappen has had his little period of dominance. And so some matches in the first round haven't been the best standard, but they have to grow the game, giving spots to different. Well, yeah, obviously you want to obviously have greater global representation. That is a very fair point. You do want to have that growing the global game. Absolutely, you want to have representation from other non-traditional. You want to grow in non-traditional markets. That's an argument that a lot of sports have, is growing in the non-traditional market and growing the game, growing the fan base. And it doesn't matter what the sport is. And that will be the argument for the World Cup in the summer, is that, yes, the US has obviously had a World Cup before, and they have a professional league structure in the US and Canada with the MLS, and of course with Liga MX in Mexico. They have these professional league structures, and Mexico's obviously got the history in the World Cup, being a 2-time host as well, and Canada being a women's host earlier in the 2010s. But growing the game in that non-traditional market where association football, for example, isn't the top sport, although it's growing rapidly as a sport in the US, especially with youth participation and grassroots participation. And there are still issues within the structures of association football at the moment. 10, 15 years ago, let's be honest, the World Championship was mostly, obviously it was mostly British, Dutch, and some Australian players. Whitlock from Australia, I think, is the example I use from Australia, and a couple of Dutch players. But we've had American players before as well in the 80s that were at a high standard. But it's how darts, in this case, has tried to promote itself overseas. Until the last 10, 15 years, the overseas promotion was not good enough. Whitlock is not the player he was. I've met him. I have met him. He does play a lot over here. He's not the player that he was. Obviously, age has caught up with him a little bit. The Wizard of Oz, but I think it's Simon Whitlock is his name. But he did a lot for growing the game in Australia. Van Barneveld has finished another first round exit. Shadow Van Barneveld's, he's. I remember watching him early on in his career. He's obviously at the tail end now. Some will say some of these players who play on too long and hold on too long and should have retired. In hindsight, could have retired 2 or 3 when the going was good. Just go realise, what, I think I've done my bit. I think it's very, very hard to work out when the time to. The fact that he keeps coming back, though, I mean, this is the problem. You say that, but obviously he loves the sport. It's given him a lot. Obviously, he was a truck driver before, and that's how he got into playing. Was he was parking up at truck stops and service stations and little hotels and B&Bs and and there would be you park your truck up, you've got a little B&B, little bar, and have a dartboard, and that's how we started playing. I think so. He did come from a normal background. A lot of these players came from normal backgrounds, either running pubs, but it's a working class man's sport. It's working class, right? And a lot of the players, there's not like a darts academy. A lot of the players obviously come from that working background. They've lived the real world. They've had real jobs. And Raymond van Barneveld was a truck driver before he became a professional darts player. Even when his early years, when he was a professional darts player, the prize money wasn't that great. And I still think the prize money is not massive. The fact that they've got more tournaments now and more chances to earn some prize money, I think, has changed. You've got the Premier League of darts and the Grand Prix of darts. Darts has changed, and the sports structure and tournament structure has changed. But I think as someone who's a professional, when it comes to being a professional in any sport, and I would class darts and snooker as sport. As some people say it's a game, but if you're a professional at it, it's more than a game. There does come a point when you're at the latter stages of a career, be it any sport. It could be a team sport or a individual sport. In this case, darts, where it's at what point do you decide enough's enough? I'm going to retire. At what point does the player, the individual, go, I think it's time to hang up now and call it a day and step back? It is very mentally taxing, yes. And if Luke Littler wins another world championship, could we debate him in the greatest of all time? Not yet. I wouldn't say just yet. I think we could have that debate when he's decided to retire, if he decides to retire. He might be one of the greatest players and retire at age 25. That could honestly happen. He could win a couple more world championships, tournaments. Go, I'm 25. I've achieved everything I can, or I want to. I'm going to retire now whilst I'm on top. And some great athletes have done that. Was it Dryden, the Montreal Canadiens goaltender who won all these Stanley Cups in the 70s? He retired at the age of 29. He went, no, done. I think he became a lawyer. Died this year. Ken Dryden, that was his name. And he won. He was the goaltender of note when the Montreal Canadiens had their record-breaking regular season. Won all these Stanley Cups, and then one day he just gave a press conference and said, I'm retiring. He was 29. £1 million for the winner. Oh, well, now it all depends on, do you class yourself as self-employed or as an employee? Because if they're self-employed and they're a sole trader, it's not 50% tax rate or 45p tax. I can't remember what the tax bracket is for top earners, but basically, if you don't use all your legal deductions, because there are legal deductions, you can get away with paying very little tax on that. The sponsors, obviously, you've got your personal sponsors and your commercial third-party arrangements where you are sponsored, where you generate some of your income, and that is also taxable. And then the prize money, I think, again, it is obviously tax deductible, and there is ways to mitigate your. My mum's an accountant. I should know all this. I don't, but there are ways where you can, when you are self-employed, that you have tax rebates and you can reduce your thresholds, for example. Plus, also, he is younger. He's younger than 21. And I don't know how that works for someone who's self-employed. But because of his age, he should be paying less in national insurance and tax anyway, even if he was on PAYE. So if Luke Littler wins, and obviously he's got to do his tax assessment, he'll put his age in, and already he's paying less tax because of his age. If darts went to terrestrial TV, would you watch? I used to watch it when it was on BBC, when it was the BDO at Lakeside. They've had it on ITV at times as well. ITV and BBC have had the darts rights. Again, it's an accessibility issue. It's the same. The argument I was having with cricket. It's an accessibility issue. If you want to grow your wider audience and get more eyes on the product, you need to have a free to air or a free streaming alternative. At least for some tournaments, not all of them, but some. If they put the World Championship 2 semi-finals and the final on, that would be a start. And you can have the choice if you want to watch I don't know if it's on Sky or TNT, whatever, pay-per-view broadcaster has the rights. You could listen to their commentary if you want to, and that's your choice because it's a free choice society, or watch from free to air. And this is where cricket, for example, has found its average viewership is falling away, and it's getting less. It's having issues with youth development and getting more young fans in. And various county championship teams have brought in various family initiatives, family days, and reduced ticket prices. UK has it bad. In other countries, people can watch the whole tournament free or for. Yeah, look, it's the same with our football TV rights, where we've got the 3 p.m. TV blackout, even for the subscription for TV. Yeah, you could put, you could go to France across the channel and watch every game. Every game is available, regardless, and you have more of a choice for a lot less money. Same in Germany. You go to Germany, it's more accessible. So definitely, when it comes to our broadcast rights and how much we as fans are willing to pay, unfortunately, people are still willing to pay for the Sky Sports and TNT and Premier Sports and the various other streaming platforms that have sports rights. Look, I pay for the Watch NRL website. I pay for that. I mean, it's a yearly fee that I pay, but I pay for a sports streaming site. I pay for Netflix, and that's now trying to get bids in for live sports rights. So it's one of them. It's one of them. I but no, we do in regards to our TV rights and how much we're charged. It's not a good look when, for example, even if I mean I look at where when I've been over to Europe. I mean I know it's been a long time since I've been to Italy or Germany or Switzerland or anywhere like that, but I do know it's a lot cheaper, and the fan viewership experience is a lot better. I can't speak for what prices would be now, but I know they're significantly cheaper. And that's borne out in viewership figures, participation. Now, yes, you could argue that the broadcast rights that those countries have for their domestic sport is less, but they still sell overseas rights and make money on their overseas TV rights that go filter back into football or back into rugby or back into ice hockey or the basketball or whatever sport that's signed those overseas. And so, but it's more accessible. I didn't watch. I didn't watch any. I didn't watch any of the games last night. It's a League Cup game, isn't it? So it's a League Cup game. So at this stage of the tournament, the big game is the final. It's a shame no team outside the Prem can make even the final nowadays. Cardiff being the last to do so in the FA Cup, Bradford in the League Cup. Yeah, we've had some. I mean, look, Coventry made a semi-final. Obviously, was it 2 seasons ago they made the FA Cup semi-final, and with 3-0 up at one point, they ultimately went on to lose the game. I think, yeah, the game has evolved and changed, and the potential's there to make a final. The potential's there, yes, but it's highly unlikely to happen in the modern game with the way spending is and budget, team budgets, and salaries and retaining of talent. So retaining talent, and then bringing in the talent, paying the talent. Wages and transfers and youth development, and it. I lost a lot of its magic. Again, going behind a paywall will do that. I remember many years ago now. We're going back 15 or so years ago. Obviously, it's a two-legged semi-final. One semi-final, the first leg was on free-to-air, and the other semi-final, the second leg was on free-to-air. And the final was always on free-to-air TV. I remember when Blackburn beat Tottenham in the early 2000s, and I remember the game was at Cardiff because this was the first final outside of Wembley, because Wembley was at that point being demolished, and they hadn't even finished the demolition job on Wembley, and Blackburn beat Tottenham 2-1 in the League Cup final. It was live on the BBC. The Football League obviously decides negotiates its rights for the broadcast rights for the League Cup and the Football League trophy and all that, and it's their decision to have their playoffs behind a paywall and the majority of the Football League trophy and the Football League Cup behind a paywall. That's the Football League's decision. That's their contractual. That's what they've negotiated with their broadcast partners. And I used to love watching the League Cup, much like I used to enjoy the FA Cup as well. I remember the '99 semi-final between Arsenal and Man United going to a replay, and obviously Ryan Giggs' solo goal that wins it for Manchester United at the death, and then obviously they go on to win a league, FA Cup, and Champions League treble. They didn't win the League Cup that year. I've got to remember who won the League Cup in '99. I don't remember. That's going to bug me. Two legs makes it impossible for a low. Not necessarily. Not necessarily. But I do think that by placing these cup competitions for the most part behind paywalls, ironically hurts the competitions. But that was it was the Football League's decision with obviously their, when they put the broadcast rights up for tender, the free-to-air channels, Channel 5, the BBC, ITV, Channel 4 were like, we don't want them. And that was a commercial decision that the broadcasters made. I just want to remember. I can't remember who won the League Cup in '99. It was played by Spurs. Oh, Tottenham won in '99. Spurs won the League Cup against Leicester City that year. But Leicester actually had a very good side that won a couple of League Cups around that era in the 90s and the 2000s. And, but again, the Football League, they're the organisers of the tournament, and they obviously wanted to find the best deal for broadcast rights that would bring in revenue, that would then obviously, get distributed to the clubs that take part, which is all 92 of the Football League, and they get a cut of the revenue there. I would care a little bit, yes. I would care. I think we've devalued over many, many years. This is partly UEFA's fault. You've got to remember that. It's partly UEFA's fault, and some of the bigger clubs in Europe, pushing for restructuring of the Champions League with group stages, and now the format we have now. UEFA, by scrapping the Cup Winners' Cup at the end of the 98-99 season, at that point, that's when the devaluing of the domestic FA Cup and League Cup competitions across Europe began, because they're a great way for clubs to win silverware or compete for silverware. But the way I think it has been devalued over a long time. But I don't think the Football League scrap it, because it makes them a bit of money. It does make the Football League revenue, and obviously Newcastle winning their first trophy in a long time, winning the competition. You go to any club that's actually won the League Cup, and it could be one of the last trophy they won. So in my club's case, it's the last trophy we won in the early 2000s. Or if you look at Leicester, it's their most successful competition. They've won the most. That's where they've had the most success as a club, is in the League Cup. You ask any fan base who wins some silverware what it means. Like it's like Swindon Town, Oxford United, and I think Luton Town as well have all had League Cup success. And Swansea, you ask any of their fans, would you want to have the competition scrapped when it's their last piece of silverware or their only piece of silverware in all these clubs' cases? And they'll probably tell you no, because for these lesser clubs, it's their gateway to Europe. It's their gateway to winning silverware. And it's like I think QPR. It's the only trophy they've won is the League Cup. And so yeah, scrapping it I don't think is a good idea. I don't think the Football League will allow that to happen because it actually hurts their revenues a little bit and hurts them because this is where they get another part of their TV deal and some of their TV money with the League Cup games. It's worth a bit of money to the Football League. And the clubs that participate, they get a bit of money out of that. So the clubs won't want to lose it because it hurts their revenue. And the Football League trophy, I mean, look, that is a key revenue earner for League One and League Two clubs when they are really on a shoestring budget, a lot of them. And a lot of them are struggling money-wise. The clubs will not vote. It's like turkeys voting for Christmas. They won't vote to scrap it because it's revenue for them. The reason why it's become Mickey Mouse is the Premier League under 21s basically playing in the competition, which devalues it. That I think is the problem. But the club chairman will not want to have these competitions scrapped because it hurts their bottom line. If they were to scrap them, they've got to raise ticket prices. And you can't justify that in League One or League Two, raising a ticket price even by £5 a ticket or £10 a ticket, because that fans won't really accept that. They won't. It would also impact player wages. Because you're selling more tickets to games and you get that extra TV revenue, because these games are obviously televised because the Football League has negotiated those TV rights. And the lower league clubs are more reliant on gate receipts. If you scrap games, if you remove games from your schedule, it's going to hurt player wages and it's going to hurt ticket prices. Ticket prices will have to go up to sustain the player wages at the level they're currently at as a starter. And then, as time goes on, eventually it will have an economic impact where you're making less money. Because would fans tolerate those raised ticket prices to mitigate the loss of these cup games? Even if it's a one extra cup game a season or two extra cup games a season that you've now lost as potential revenue, especially League Cup. Let's go for League Cup or FA Cup let's go for the bigger competitions like the FA Cup. Now we've lost replays. That really hurts the lower league clubs a lot more. A hell of a lot more. And because you've lost those replays, the ticket prices actually for FA Cup games, which are not governed by the Football League and not governed by the Premier League, they're governed by the FA, ticket prices are actually more exorbitant. Some clubs really take the advantage of fans going as they put prices up. That is an argument, but that's the modern game. It's use your squad. Use your squad. These are professional players. Some of the fringe players want to get a run out. They want to prove that they can compete for places. I wouldn't say that, but at the same time, if you were to scrap the League Cup and the Football League trophy, that could potentially put some clubs into administration. And I'm not joking, especially in League One and League Two. They're on such fine margins financially that a little cup run in one of these competitions, that extra little bit of revenue that comes in, appearing at Wembley live on TV, even if it's only the Football League trophy, and even if it's only the League Cup or the FA Vase for the non-league, by appearing at Wembley on a televised game, that actually means revenue, and the football pyramid is obviously in a very precarious state, and the finances of the sport are in a very precarious state right now. They really are. The distribution of TV rights and the prize money and various things, the financial distribution of how the money filters down is not the way we were promised. Now, I think there needs to be rules put in place to prevent 9, 10, 11, 12 changes happening to a starting squad or a starting lineup plus bench. I think we do potentially need to have the FA, the Football League, and the Premier League coming in and saying, right, you're only allowed X amount of changes to a starting lineup. You have to justify them. Any more than that, and you'll get fined for each changeover. Let's say 7 changes at the most, or 5 changes at the most. Rotate the squad a little bit, yes. But if we start to see what I think Mick McCarthy got heavily criticised back in the day as Wolves manager when he made, I think, 10 changes for a game. I think it was an FA Cup game. I can't remember. It was either a league game or an FA Cup game. He goes, look, my responsibility to my employers, be it the board, was to keep this club in the Premier League. Now, if we, I think it was a Premier League game. He goes, I've also got to try and go on a cup run here to earn the club extra revenue, and if we can win the FA Cup or League Cup, and he basically there was a cup tie, and then he had a league game. And he made I think 10 or 11 changes, and he got criticised by many. He went, well, look, I've got priorities. If we go on a cup run, great, but my priority is to keep this team in the Premier League. Now they lost the game, I believe. I think got hammered in the league game, but he got criticised. But his words were, well, I've got to weigh up the options: a good cup run and Premier League survival, or we don't have that cup run, impacts the morale, and then Premier League survival becomes more precarious. And he basically was like, look, I've got to manage expectations here. This is where we're at as a club, blah, 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 blah. And he got criticised. But I do think he was in a rock and a hard place, because at that point, Wolves were not in the position as a club that, well, they're not in a good position now, but at that point, they were a little bit of a yo-yo club. They were finding it hard to establish themselves in the Premier League again and avoid relegation. And they wanted to, and the ownership basically was like, we want to stabilise. We want to be a Premier League club. And yes, Cardiff had a quarter final in the end. And yeah, at the end of the day, you know, each chairman or owner or board will appoint a manager, and they will have objectives for the season to come, or the length of contract. Let's say 3 to 5 year contract, and they will say, right, what are our objectives? And Crystal Palace's objectives are to go from, right, we've won the FA Cup, let's win some more trophies. Let's build upon what we've done last season. And I think Glasnow's doing that. And their European campaign's not dead, but they're doing very well in the league. And they enter the FA Cup third round when it kicks off. And they have a very good chance, I think, of retaining and winning the FA Cup again. And, you know, Steve Parish has come out and said, our objective is to go from here upwards. Well, our objective is we've won a first trophy, we're competing in Europe, but at the same time, not only that, our objective is to finish high in the Premier League and challenge for European and further domestic silverware. So there is that. 33,000. Well, it's a big game, isn't it? It's maybe not a Premier League fixture like it used to be, but it's a big game. 33,000. But then again, following week, next game, you might have 20,000 in attendance or 25. But you've also got to understand the economics of Wales. There's not as much money in Wales as there is in other parts of the UK. I'm not saying Cardiff's a poor city, but it has very poor areas. And the fan base, the wider fan base that support Cardiff, come from outside Cardiff as well. It's not just Cardiff, it's the wider catchment area as well. And some of the towns and villages outside Cardiff aren't necessarily the wealthiest areas in the world. And there's some beautiful villages in the Welsh valleys, but a lot of it obviously relates back to the mining industries and steel, and getting the copper and the tin and the coal and other minerals out the ground, and a lot of those mines have closed. There's a high amount of unemployment or lack of employment opportunities. and there is a significant lack of investment. And look, I think the Welsh government and the British government, I think, can do better in that regard. And that's where I think the economy. That's where I'm getting onto the economy now. I think there could be a bit more investment in new technologies and new industries and new businesses and trying to regenerate the economy a little bit in these the tourism. I mean, tourism is really undervalued, I think, in Wales. I think, but it's a very seasonal kind of industry. But more modern manufacturing. I think some of these old industrial towns and villages in the valleys have been hammered over the last 20, 30, 40 years. Some have done quite well, others are really very deprived, very poor, lack of opportunity and lack of wages. Cardiff and Swansea by far the most fans in Wales. Wrexham with a decent catchment. Um, Wrexham's got is in a more rural area, much more rural. But there are some industries in Wrexham, like the brewing industry, obviously the agricultural industry with food processing and such. But again, it's the average income of the fan base, and I think what is a positive is the investment that the Wrexham owners, Rob McElhenney and Ryan Reynolds have done with stadium development. That's created some construction jobs and boosted the local economy a little bit, increasing their capacity. Visitors, there's a bigger away section now, so more away fans can come, and they will obviously spend money in the town or the city now because it's got city status. They will spend money, food, drink, make a day of it. So there's some positives to. This is where sport has a massive positive on the local communities and local economies, because it does attract investment in a variety of areas, be it construction or transport infrastructure improvements and other investment, because now you've got all these visitors coming in, hotels. So hotel accommodation, that becomes a priority for potential development. And then you have the restaurants, the pubs. So the hospitality industry gets a boost. And then there's obviously the local public transportation network. I mean, there's a lot of state involvement there, but there's various things that a sport team in a town or a city or a district can do for a local economy. England have some club rivalry problems about loose in the past with players in Wales. Unfortunately, Cardiff and Swansea hate each other, and there's a bad feeling when Cardiff was. Look, there's a lot of clubs where it's almost sacrilege for one player to play for both. We remember Luis Figo when I don't know if he played for Real Madrid or Barcelona first, but he swapped clubs in the El Clasico, and he received so much hate. With missiles being thrown at him, the famous pig's head incident. I think it was at the Bernabeu, the new camp. I can't remember, but there was the pig's head. I've got to remember. I'm gonna have a little search on this, but I remember when Luis Figo, when he was playing in Spain, and I've got to remember, was he playing at Barcelona or Real Madrid first? But he swapped clubs, and this is about 20 odd years ago. Shit, who's this? Go away. Yeah, so and he obviously swapped clubs. And rival fans on the other club, I can't remember if it was Real Madrid or Barcelona, they just lobbed missiles at him throughout the game, every corner, every free kick, every time he was near the touchline, and he he really did take a lot of abuse. 2002 El Clasico match with Barcelona fans. It was because he went from Barca to Real Madrid. And it took 2 years after after his transfer for the pig's head incident, and how they managed to get a pig's head in there, I don't know. But that was a moment, I think, a watershed moment um, in um, in that rivalry, uh, and I think it changed El Clasico. El Clasico was always a heated, hated rivalry because the political aspect, going back to the Franco regime in Spain from the late 30s through till the mid 70s. So there was a political aspect to the rivalry, but it wasn't. It was a very nasty incident, and it obviously made a lot of headlines. And yeah, I remember that vividly. It made big headlines, a big talking point, and it painted Spanish football in a really bad light. You don't have a good feeling for this World Cup, to be honest. Poor attendance, poor match, too many games. My initial feelings, we shall see. Look, I have no issue with obviously, for, any tournament wanting to grow the game, get more nations playing, grow the game globally. We've seen it in a lot of sports where they've increased the size of tournaments, for better or for worse. Rugby League found out that expanding the tournament wasn't a good idea, and they've decided at this World Cup this year to shrink it back down again, which is fine. The Rugby Union World Cup next year is in 2027, shall I say, next year basically, is going to be an expanded tournament. FIFA have decided, well, other international tournaments are expanding. So the World Championship of Ice Hockey is bigger than it used to be. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. What I am concerned about is the ticket prices, potential security issues. Not only for us, potential for I'm not ever going to be able to afford to go because the flights alone would be 2 months' wages and a month's rent. With what some of the flight prices, the cheapest World Cup ticket for the final is a month's wages and a month's rent combined. Now, look, I've had an argument on the Talksport channel on their comments section, saying people say I'm out of touch with reality, and I don't. Well, the reason why I left that comment was, well, he's not reading the room. Simon Jordan, I don't like Simon Jordan, but there you go. And he does contradict himself when he's ranting and raving about things. FIFA had a controllable element. We all expected that ticket prices would be more expensive than the Euros. We accepted that. We expected that the whole Qatar thing, there would be a bit of price inflation. We accepted that. But to be a minimum of 5 times more expensive to 30 times more expensive, depending on the price range for tickets, is not good look. Look, if it was $30-40 more expensive for the cheapest ticket over Qatar, I think that would have been acceptable. It was a controllable element by FIFA, and they haven't given enough allocation for the cheaper tickets, and they're trying to force people to buy the more expensive tickets, which I think has backfired on them. It's backfired on them, in my opinion. The other concerns I have is US domestic and foreign policy, including their immigration policy, because obviously they're considering. At the moment, we're one of the 40 countries where you don't require an entry visa to enter the US. We are visa exempt for travel and work, for example, in the US. We've just got to fill our forms in. So there's certain declaration forms you have to complete when you go to the US, or if you're considering going to the US. And at the moment, it's voluntary to say you can search my social media history. They want to make it compulsory. Now, look, every country's got its own immigration policies, and we have to abide by them, whether we like them or not. And it varies from country to country. At the moment, Germany, us, I think loads of European EU, most of the EU, for example, don't require, and Australia, I believe, as well, don't require a visa entry. We just have to do our declaration forms and be truthful on them. there are 40 countries that have to do these non-visa but declaration forms. And it's it's not overly complicated, but it can be. If you make one little mistake, that could be you detained by TSA for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 hours. And they can be quite, but there's already backlogs anyway. So the concern I have is the backlogs at airports, because they are notoriously slow at processing when it comes to customs. But if they bring this legislation in, that's going to put a lot of people off. There's already a downturn in inward travel to the US from Europe and Australasia and South America, where a lot of fans are going to be, entering the US for the World Cup. Other countries, Africa, not so much. Africa's a bit mixed, but the major trend, Europe and South America, there's been a reduction in international travel. Canada as well is a big one, which is a co-host, which is really concerning. And Mexico, there's been a big drop off in travel to the US. But what we saw last year at the Copa America, especially in the final, the security failures there, the ticketing issues, when you got your ticket, go to the stadium, and the ticket entrance was difficult. Stadium accessibility, public transport. Some of the stadiums are not conveniently located near downtown. It depends where you go. The two Canadian stadiums of Vancouver and Toronto are very centrally located to downtown Toronto, downtown Vancouver. They're a big part of the cityscape, and they're very easy to get to with public transportation. There are some in the US, like Seattle's in a very good location, so that's thumbs up. But for example, I think it's Kansas City, not sorry, I've got to message someone from work, so it's a bit important. I don't have a good feeling. FIFA never decrease anything. The lower range ticket they've suddenly brought in on the cheap end. I think that's not enough tickets. Personally, look, if I had the money and I had the option to go Canada, US, or Mexico, I personally would go to Canada, and that's the most expensive of the three to go and visit. And And even then, looking at the prices for the tickets, that's off putting. Um, I think I will look. I will watch as many games as I can. Um, I will watch as many games as I can. I would say that it's not going to be. This is going to be the first World Cup where I actually can't watch every game or parts of every game. Um, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I think you can have too much of a good thing. I think FIFA, look, they've decided to expand the tournament. That's fine. Their ticket pricing strategy has backfired catastrophically. But here's the reason why they can get away with it. Dynamic pricing, there is no regulation in North America against dynamic pricing that we are seeing here in Europe and we're seeing in Australia and we see in other parts of the world where legislation has been brought in to protect the consumer. So FIFA have realised, well, we haven't got anything preventing us from charging as much as we want. They have misread the room. They want to maximise profit, but at the same time, fans just don't have the disposable income that they did 2006, 2010, 2014, 2018. And they were good World Cups for the fan experience. A lot of, even though you could argue 2010 wasn't the best for playing performance, the fan experience in South Africa, they said the South Africans were brilliant hosts. There were some issues, but the South Africans were very friendly people. It was very affordable. And a lot of fans did have a good experience in South Africa. A lot of fans had a good experience in Brazil. A lot of fans had a great experience in Germany. And suddenly we've seen this, mess that has been a thing. Um, Hang on. But am I looking forward to the holiday season? I mean, I've got to work. I'm at work tomorrow, and I'm at work Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, and then obviously Thursday, Fridays I'm off, and then I'm back in Saturday. So I'm working most of it. So I'm not really going to enjoy it. Really, I get to spend 3 days over the festive period not working, and I will, you know, be working next Saturday, the Saturday after, and the Saturday after that. So, um, to be honest, I don't really get overly excited about anything anymore. I've reached a point now where I'm more focused on just making sure I keep a roof over my head and pay my bills at this point. Honestly, I'm working most of it, and as I say, it's a time of year I've actually grown to dislike. But I wouldn't say dislike. Look, I've always said this, and I will always do a Christmas message and a New Year's message to everyone. And I do wish the best for everyone over this period. It's a very difficult period for a lot of people. Very difficult period for a lot of people. And obviously, what we saw in Australia last weekend just really hits home how there is a lot of hate out there, and it's all the holiday season from October through till Easter. This period over winter, um, the holiday season, depending on where you are in the world, but the holiday season from Diwali through till um, Orthodox Easter, which is actually in April, but anyway, Orthodox Christmas Easter. Um, it's a very tough time for a lot of people this time of year. There's a lot of people in a much worse position than us. I would always say that. Um, there's a lot of people going through it tough right now. And last year I was going through a tough time. And the year before, actually, the last few years I've gone through a tough time at this time of year. I don't like this time of year. It can be very lonely. It isn't. There's a lot of people who don't find it very enjoyable. I look. Honestly, the last I stopped liking Christmas when I was a kid. To be honest, I noticed how stressed members of my family got over that period. There was a lot of arguments, and there's a lot of pressure on people at the time of year. And ultimately, I think I think it's over commercialized. I think that adds a lot of pressure to it. I think we've forgotten what the true meaning I think is, which is togetherness, seeing friends and family and just, enjoying each other's company and simple things. Um, but it's the six. I'm going over my mum's for a few hours, but it's a chance to see mum, see my brother, see the dogs get attacked by the dogs. My brother's obviously going through his health issues at the moment. He's doing it tough, and it is upsetting that my brother's not very well, and yeah, it's had an impact on me. My brother's obviously going through, he's got an immune system condition, which um, obviously getting quite serious now, and beginning of 2026 is gonna there's gonna be it's gonna be tough for my family. He's got to see a specialist. He's got to see the specialist again and have some more tests done, and we've got to sit down as a family and it's not. Yeah, I don't enjoy this time of year. I really don't. The weather's meant to be. I don't know. The weather's meant to be quite. Apparently, there's a chance of snow. Actually, there's a chance of a real cold spell coming. I'm going to say. Let me just quickly check the weather because I think we've got a chance of a cold spell this week. Um, when is it? It is going to start getting cold next week. Yeah, it is actually. The temperatures are going to start dropping. It's never rain outside. I got soaked on the way home, so I finished work early today. I finished work at like 10 o'clock, so I was walking home early. I'd nearly finished today, which was kind of nice. Not that I wanted to be in work today, I've had enough. Okay, it's not going to drop below freezing, but the temperature is going to be lower than what we're having now. It's going to be cold. It's going to be cold. Christmas Eve is dry where I am. Christmas Day is dry where I am. Boxing Day, Saturday, and then it just stays really cold. Single figures. But it's absolutely hammering down here. I mean, it's been it was miserable this morning. We had freezing fog. Was it yesterday or the day before we had freezing fog? It's not been pleasant. The weather conditions have been pretty crap. So um, but at the end of the day, I've got to work during this period, and it's just as it is. I mean, the weather is. I think it will improve. I think it's going to be pretty boring weather. There's a chance of a bit of snow and a bit of frost over Christmas and New Year's, but I think we're potentially likely to have snow come January, February time. I think as we go into the new year, I think the weather's going to, get a bit more wintry, and we're more likely to get snow February and March than in December. I mean, we've had snow in November down here. It did snow down here a couple of weeks, about 2, 3 weeks ago. It snowed, maybe 4 weeks ago. We had a bit of snow. So we have had snow in November, and that's the first time I've seen snow in November this far south since 1995. So, and I remember 95, 96, we had a fair bit of snow that winter. So I think there's the possibility for more bad weather. But look, the west of the UK and Ireland, there's been a lot of heavy rain. There's been flooding. And that's just part of it, isn't it? It's unfortunately part of the weather cycle at the moment. I have heard there's been some really, and that's another thing that impacts the infrastructure, and obviously that does have a knock-on impact for sport. But yeah, North Wales, Central Wales is not parts of. I mean, look, I'm a Blackburn fan. We've had 2 matches nearly completed that the pitch has just given up, the drainage has given up. So the northwest, Wales, the southwest, a lot of heavy rain, and a lot of flooding. But this comes on the back of a very dry summer. And what has happened, and it's a geography thing. I don't want to bore too many people, but what has actually happened is the topsoil, the water hasn't seeped through, and the water table is very, very low, and the ground is basically turned to concrete. It really is. The ground is. I've got friends who do metal detecting, and they're even saying now, even with all the rain we've had, when they dig their plugs to get the metal item out, let's say it's a coin, they're metal detecting. The ground is still actually surprisingly very, very dry when you dig into it, but just below the topsoil. So the water isn't seeping through, and which is contributing to the flooding we're getting. Now, eventually, yes, what we really need is not heavy rain, but light rain, just constantly, a little bit of drizzle every day, maybe overnight and early in the morning, just slowly seep through a little bit of sunlight, okay, a bit more rain, light rain, but we're not getting that. What we're getting is these bands of storms, basically, and strong weather systems, where a post-tropical cyclone has died over the North Atlantic and dissipated a little bit, but the weather's coming in these waves, basically. And I do think when it comes to like the FA Cup third round, and when it comes to the pre-season for the Super League, for example, when it comes to like Rugby Union and the Six Nations, I do think the weather is going to have an impact on the quality of sport that we see between now and Easter. I do think the amount of rain we've had recently and the snow, plus the runoff we're having, I think we are going to see that impact the playing surfaces and the quality of the football, rugby league, rugby union, and even in the early stages of the cricket season in April, when the county cricket season starts at the beginning of April, we are going to see an impact on the playing surfaces. Because obviously at the moment, the cricket squares, they're undercover, and they're going to be prepping them come March for the opening of the cricket season. And you will notice as the season goes from end of March, beginning of April to September, October, the wickets, they really evolve. They evolve, basically. And what let's say the Oval was one of my favourite cricket grounds is the Oval in Vauxhall in South London. The Oval wicket early April is different from the Oval wicket in the first week of September, with how the ball behaves when the fast bowler's coming in with in swing or reverse swing, or a spin bowler's trying to get some leg spin or off breaks. The ball reacts with the playing surface, the cracks in there. If we have a wet summer, it's very green wicket. If we have a dry summer, it's a very brown wicket. And what you want is something in between. You want a bit of rain, a bit of moisture, to keep the wicket fresh, but not too green and not too dry. If it's too green, when you've got pace bowlers, it impacts how the ball reacts off the seam and how it swings out or swings in, or even how it bounces with a bouncer. Spin bowling, when you got that left arm or right arm spin, doesn't matter how you spin the ball and you put that rotation on the ball. When that again engages with a crack in the surface, or when you're spinning with the seam when it's spinning, and it makes contact with the wicket, and how it reacts and how it spins off or jags back or however it responds, you know, you get uneven bounce, you could get uneven spin, you know, you could get variable swing when you're not expecting it. And then it makes it difficult for the batsman and the bowler. And it's also a pain in the arse for the groundskeepers to try and keep the wicket as playable as possible. And of course, you want to have that home wicket advantage where you want to have more of a bowling wicket or a batting wicket, depending on the strength of your lineup. But if you're preparing, I mean, I love the oval it's a good spinner's wicket, good batting wicket as well. In fact, it's a good all round wicket. It's a very good test. Say with Headingley, it's a very good test venue. But if you are having the conditions we're having now this winter, following a dry summer, it can impact how a cricket wicket is prepared over winter and into the spring. So um, so yeah, there is it's the same with groundskeepers, obviously preparing football pitches and rugby pitches for matches as well, and it is impacting the drainage. As a Blackburn fan, we've obviously seen drainage issues at Ewood Park this season over the last couple of months. And that is very concerning that we've had 2 matches abandoned because of waterlogged pitch in the second half of games. And up the road, Preston were also playing at home in similar conditions, and Deepdale held up really well. And that is really concerning. Now, yes, the river, you know, Darwin does flow directly behind the Riverside stand. It's not as if there's a fair gap. I mean, the river is literally behind the football stadium. So the positioning of Ewood Park is okay. You could question, should we redevelop the stadium or have a new stadium? Not going to happen with the current ownership, obviously. But the position of the stadium is not a great location for runoff. It's in the bottom of a very steep-sided valley, and it does flood. But obviously, not the only football team to have a waterlogged pitch as a concern, or a frozen pitch as a concern, because that could also happen. A lot more clubs have invested in undersoil heating. A lot of clubs have invested in better drainage. But there's a point where you can't take any more water into the watercourse and into the water system. And I don't know how bad the weather. I mean, let's have a look at. Let me just have a look at the weather radar, because I know it's horrendous. I know the weather is absolutely horrendous. It's really bad rain right now. We've got a weather warning where I am. I don't know about up in North Wales, but the rain's going to ease off. But it's going to be a lot colder tomorrow, which is not particularly ideal, but such is life. But we've got a moderate rain warning. I think it's an amber warning. So we've got a weather warning or a weather alert. I don't know if is it an alert or warning. I don't know. It's a moderate rain warning until 9 p.m. this evening. But it's there's the radar right now. So if you look closely, that dot is where I am, and that's the weather radar as the evening wears on. We've got a few more hours of heavy rain, yeah, and then about 9 o'clock there'll be a few pop-up showers, and then it's gonna die off. That is the concern, is the amount of rainfall that's going to fall. It rained heavily overnight the other night as well. We had some heavy rain overnight. I think it rained overnight last night quite heavily, and so that woke me up this morning, was the heavy rain. As I was walking to work this morning, the rain had eased. But honestly, end of the day, that's that. How long do I think he lasts at Celtic? I don't know. I think there's 4 games in. It's clearly not working. That's obvious. I think Celtic, much like Rangers, have got a lot of issues off the field, in the boardroom, and in club administration. I think the fact they're on their 3rd manager of the season says to me they're not going to have a successful season. I don't know how long he lasts. This could be like another Postecoglou experiment, but the damage could be done if the Celtic board, they've made the decision, they've appointed him. But if this continues, and all Hearts have got to do is win 2 out of 3, let's say, win 2, draw 1, just keep that kind of momentum going, the season's gone. And look, it's the way the whole Brendan Rodgers situation unfolded was quite damaging for the club. A lot of negative headlines there, and you could see that with Brendan Rodgers, the board, the fans, all the stakeholders, it deteriorated quite quickly, became quite a public deterioration. And that was handled badly. It was a very public breakdown in the relationship, very, very public, which, as I say, was handled very, very badly by all parties. What happened with Rangers as well? That was a mess. And a mess. Rangers has been a mess of their own making for many, many years. I think they made a mistake letting Gerrard go. I think he should have, if he stayed another season, potentially, they could have done better. But again, this is scouting, recruitment, getting the managers in. The managers they brought in, and now it's going to be the same at Celtic, because what's happened is they brought Brendan Rodgers back after he left Leicester, and people could argue, obviously, his time at Leicester, he'd run his course, and it had some impacts on Leicester themselves getting relegated. But they bring him back, and he's won an FA Cup. Okay, he's won some more silverware down south of the border, which is something he didn't do at Liverpool. You could argue that, and that's thumbs up. He wins some silverware in a much tougher competition to win. Fine, but some of the decisions Brendan Rodgers took, along with the Leicester board, the performances dropped off following that FA Cup win a couple of seasons ago. He gets reappointed by Celtic following Postecoglou's exit for another stint up at Celtic. And Postecoglou, obviously, his time at Tottenham, wins a trophy, gets fired, goes to Forest, gets fired. And you could argue the pros and cons of his style of play and how that works out. And then you look at the situation where Brendan Rodgers gets reappointed by Celtic. Obviously, they win last year. The struggles in Europe continue. And with the new format of the Champions League, fans are like, we should be winning more games here. We should at least be more competitive, have a potential chance of squeaking into a knockout stage, that kind of thing, for the first time in a while. And then very early on this season, it was very, very apparent, even throughout the summer, that the relationship between Brendan Rodgers and the board and various things played out very publicly in the media. We don't know who's really at fault there. The relationship breaks down. Brendan Rodgers leaves. Martin O'Neill comes in as interim for a brief period. Again, 20 years away from the club. Obviously, Martin O'Neill, has a soft spot for Celtic. Obviously, was very successful there as a manager. But he's in his 70s. Got to bear that in mind. And obviously, when he gave that press conference, we said, look, I'm only here as a short-time interim. I'm not planning to stay the rest of the season. I'm here until they get a replacement. I'm just kidding. As soon as he said that, he made it very, very clear that he was there temporarily. He's only there to help out the club because he's got a fondness for the club. He had a lot of success there. He's doing it as a temporary measure, as a stopgap, because he doesn't want to be in full-time management again. Not at his age. He's happily basically retired from management. Does his media commitments every now and then, but he's done his stint as a player and as a manager in the game. They decide to go down the route of Wilfred Darcy, bring him in. And the League Cup final defeat, that I think was one of the worst Celtic performances domestically in Scotland I've seen since Cally Thistle did them 2 decades ago. Cally fantastic, Celtic are atrocious was the headline. When Inverness Cally Thistle were outside the SPL at the time, they were in lower levels of the Scottish game, destroyed Celtic at Celtic Park at Parkhead. That's got to be the worst Celtic performance. I mean, I just looked at the highlight. I watched the highlights. I mean, if I'd watched the full game, I'd have had my view on it. But ultimately, that was they should have lost. They could have lost 6 or 7-1. They were 1-0 down after 90 seconds. I mean, that was a shocking start. Defensively, they were poor. Their goal was a good goal. I'm not going to lie, that was a good goal. St Mirren that was one of the few times they struggled to clear their lines. And again, but then St Mirren responded really well, and that third goal, brilliant counter attack. The second goal was another 2 brilliant headers. So defensively, a massive concerns there with the defensive systems. Now, are they marking zonal? Are they marking man to man? Have they just got a hybrid system? Who's picking up what runner? Are there some people marking zonal and those others picking up the runners? Whatever defensive system they've got in place, they're not dealing with the balls into the box from corners, free kicks, and crosses. That's for sure. And St Mirren could have put 5, 6, or 7 past Celtic. Honestly, that's how bad Celtic were and how good St Mirren were. Then the defeat to Hearts, and then you've got the defeat to Dundee United. So you lose in Europe, and you lose 2 league games and a cup final as your first 4 games in charge. Not a good start. Now, I don't know much about Wilfred Nancy, to be honest. As a former player and as a coach, don't know much about him. Now, that in itself is a bit concerning, that he's not a well-known, high-profile coach. And that lack of name recognition, I think, is part of the problem as well. Wilfred, let's have a look at Wilfried Nancy. He's a French professional football manager, former player. He's manager so he grew up in Le Havre. Let's have a little read about his background, because he's not a household name. I think he's coached in the MLS as well, which is, you get various levels of success coaching over there when you come back to Europe. Right. So he's born in Le Havre. He played for Toulon, a random. What's this club called? Beau Carrois, Rayon L'Etape, Ivry. He played for a lot of lower league clubs, so he wasn't really a big name player. He's coached CF Montreal and Columbus Crew in the MLS. That's his head coaching experience. So he played at the lower levels of the French game. So he's not a well-known. He's not well known in management. So I don't know why Celtic have decided to go down this route and appoint him. And there's a big risk taking on a relatively unknown coach. Now, look, he's been a head coach or a manager for multiple seasons in the MLS. So it's not as if he hasn't had experience coaching professional players. But he's only coached 2 clubs prior to this, and his head coaching career started in 2021. So he's only been in football management as the head guy for 4 years. And that it's a big risk by Celtic. Now, I don't know how long his contract is that they've given him and promised him. And I don't like seeing managers get sacked. But 4 games, 4 defeats, and they're leaking goals. So it's gone wrong somewhere. It has gone wrong somewhere, and even when Brendan Rodgers was at the end, it was going wrong. So something has gone wrong between end of last season and now. Well, they're not supposed to know. St Mirren have stopped that, and I think it would be good if Hearts win the league. Of course, one of my best friends is a Hibs fan, so there is that banter that we have, that it's the wrong Edinburgh club. But look, I honestly think that aside, I think it is important that another club not from Glasgow and wins the league. Yeah, I think Aberdeen. I mean, Aberdeen. I mean, look, it's been a long time. I've never seen a non-old firm winner in my lifetime. Well, expanding the league will help. There's been that debate. There has been that debate about the structure of Scottish football, and making and improving the quality. That is a debate that's been had for some time. Potentially switching it to a summer league, like some of the other like some of the Scandinavian leagues do. As again, is another argument that's been had. Honestly, though, I do think, look, it's the league structure we've got now. You've got to, I don't would expanding the league improve the quality? Not necessarily. I think what north of the border, what it needs is investment. It needs outside investment to come in and be willing to invest. There's enough games cancelled in Scotland when the weather turns bad in this time of year. You will see a lot of postponements in the next 2 months when it comes to the weather. So potentially, yeah, a summer league could work. It could make it more competitive. It could change things. There's various ideas on the table, and they have been debated and raised before. So it's an interesting one. But yeah, 4 old firm games a season in just the league. That's not including the cup competitions. You could have up to 6 old firm derbies a season if you count the 2 cup competitions. That's overkill. But then you've got a minimum of 4 Edinburgh derbies a season, not including the cup competitions. So again, it's and Partick and Queens Park will have a couple of full clashes this season in the championship. So again, it doesn't matter that it's the Old Firm or the other Glasgow derby, as I call it, the Partick Queens Park. But I'm just talking about the derby matches. So Hibs and Hearts, that's 4 times minimum. Partick Queens Park this season, 4 times minimum. Rangers Celtic, 4 times minimum. It does lose a little bit. It does. I think that's overkill. You can have too much of a good thing. It weakens. I think it damages the rivalry rather than strengthens it. I think it weakens it. So there is that argument for increasing the size of the league, and then they're playing each other twice in the league season. Having a lengthier winter break. There's all sorts. I've been looking at the promotion relegation system and the playoff system and how that all works. Because there is no perfect system. There's no perfect system. But at the moment, I think a lot of Scottish clubs would be like, can we play Celtic and Rangers every week with the way they're playing and how vulnerable they look? Obviously, Rangers coming off that poor start to the season and Celtic having their disastrous period now, and Hearts who've had their wobble, they've still top, and this is part of it. I do think it's important for Scottish football that another team wins the league, and the league becomes more competitive in this coming rest of the decade, at least the rest of the decade until 2030. I think that's important. If they do decide to restructure and expand the top flight, or restructure where they merge the lower leagues together to form a bigger championship and a bigger top flight to sort of mirror what's south of the border, that could potentially be a way to improve the competitiveness and the quality. Yeah, sure. But at the same time, that's not necessarily improving the Scottish club's fare in Europe. They've been shocking. And now St Mirren will be playing in Europe next season. Who would have thought? People may not like, but Scotland needs to its own Wrexham. Well, yeah, they do. And that could be a Partick, or it could be a Motherwell, or it could be a Falkirk, or a St Johnstone, or a Kilmarnock, or I don't know, a lesser club. Yeah, absolutely. I think that is a very valid and fair point. True. It definitely other clubs other than Glasgow and Rangers need investment from outside Scotland, whether that's just someone from the UK or, dare I say it, from the US coming in and going, right, we're going to invest in these clubs to make the league more competitive. Because I think it's got to a point now where it's got to a point where it's been dominated for too long by Celtic and Rangers, and they had their own period like Rangers, Celtic, Rangers, Celtic. Whereas in the 70s and 80s, it was a very, very feisty, even in the 50s and 60s, very feisty, with a lot of different clubs having their little periods of success, even if it's a couple of trophies, a couple of league titles. And unfortunately, for the last 40 odd years, it just hasn't been the case. And that is unfortunately hurting Scotland when it comes to internationally and domestically. And there's a reason why, until recently, from 98 until the Euros, the delayed Euros in 2021, that should have been played in 2020, but the delayed, there was a reason why we had over more than 2 decades of a failure of a Scottish side to qualify for an international tournament. And now they've qualified for 3 out of the last 4. So Steve Clarke is doing something. I think, was it St Johnstone or Kilmarnock that won the League Cup and the FA Cup double with under Steve Clarke, the manager? Was it St Johnstone or Kilmarnock that did the Cup double? And that was the first club not called Rangers or Celtic to do that in, I think, ever. It needs more stories like that, where you get an SPL club, a lesser club, but an SPL club, a reasonable sized club, to do a cup double or a League Cup double, and then suddenly the debate changes. Now Aberdeen is seen as the last dominant club in Scotland that wasn't, as I say, called Rangers or Celtic. It needs something like that, where what's happening with Hearts right now, what St Mirren have just done last week, it needs something like that to happen more regularly. And I think we're starting to see signs of it going in the right direction. I think it was Kilmarnock. Was it St Johnstone? I think it was. Who did Steve Clarke manage to a cup double? That's going to annoy me now. Was it Steve Clarke? Was it St John? I can't remember who it was now, but we've got a point. We've got to get to a point where we have a more competitive league, where more teams are competing for trophies, let alone the league title, but where it can mirror other mid-range leagues in Europe, like the Swiss league, which is highly competitive. Poland has had 5 different winners in 5 seasons. 3 of them are first-time winners. People go, Poland league has suddenly become very competitive in the last 5 seasons. 5 different league winners in 5 years. I was reading that today, actually. I was reading that on an article today. That was amazing. That amazed me. The Swiss league, historically, very competitive. People are like, what? Really? When I was in the club histories, I was looking at the Swiss league going, Christ, there's a lot of different winners here. Historically, until PSG's had all the money, the French league was historically very competitive. And you take Bayern out of contention the last 15 years, Germany's exceptionally competitive historically. It just so happens that Bayern's adapted well to what we call the modern Champions League era. But in reality, it's more competitive. People realise grasshoppers need to bounce back. Sorry, that's a good one. I have to admit that is a good bit of a pun there. Good play on words. But no, seriously, the Swiss league is actually very highly competitive historically. Very highly competitive historically. Some of the lesser European leagues, as certain fans would say of the modern generation, I think the Dutch league and the Portuguese league could be more competitive and should be more competitive. Of course, Boa Vista had their collapse this season where they've gone out of business. And they were one of the few clubs outside of the big three to lift the title. And of course, they've gone belly up. Does winning the league potentially? I mean, you can have too much of a good thing. Sometimes having that one or two bad seasons just brings you back to reality. The Prem isn't really that competitive anymore. True. And that, I think, is part of the problem that we've had. Is Man City's been bookended basically by Liverpool. But then you look in the previous decade, suddenly you had first-time winner in Leicester City. If Arsenal can finally win the league with Arteta, I think that's important. If Crystal Palace can continue with their really good form and be in them, and Aston Villa mixing it up, that is important. And we saw last season a lot of teams end trophy droughts or win their first trophies, and I think that was good for European football as a whole. That different teams are getting success and winning silverware and competing. I think that's important. I think it is Aston Villa, one of the most historical clubs, when it comes to success, founder of the Football League. If it's not for Aston Villa and their chairman, and I do mean this, if it's not for Aston Villa, we don't get the Football League founded in 1888. I think it was they had a couple of meetings and a couple of telegrams were sent, because this is letters and telegrams back. I think the telephone had recently been, it was about to be invented or just been invented, so it wasn't really a thing. But you still have the old post office telegram. And I believe it was the Villa chairman at the time contacted and sent a telegram to, which club was it? Another club chairman, and ordered or recommended that an open invite for club chairman to meet. I forget the name of the hotel in Manchester. And in the end, 12 clubs came together and they formed the Football League. But one of the rules was only one team per town or city could be in the Football League, which is why the Football Alliance forms the next year. Wasn't he Scott? I can't remember who the chairman was, but the chairman of Villa sent a telegram or a letter, I can't remember what, basically a post office telegram, to other club chairmen that summer. So we're talking about June, July time, because they'd already had meetings and discussion. They already had meetings and discussions, and in 1887, 1888 to this point. If it's not for Aston Villa's chairman, I forget who it was. I'm going to have to look back at my notes. I have to go through my notebooks, but that was a key moment in the direction, because that football as a sport, association with football as a sport takes, because you get the Rival Football Alliance set up the next year, and then very, very quickly the Football League realised you could have multiple teams in the same town or city competing, because it actually drew bigger crowds. So Sheffield Wednesday, Sheffield United becomes a thing. Nottingham Forest, Notts County becomes a thing. And they realised it could be economically viable to have two clubs in the same town or same city. And so they merged the two. The surviving Football Alliance clubs merge into the Football League. Another one of the reasons the Football League succeeds and the Alliance fails is they were better organised. They had a better organisation. The Football Alliance was so badly organised, it was unreal. And it was also a follow-up onto the combination, which, again, badly organised. The fixture list was a mess. And it just, it was better organised, better structure, better working relationship with the club chairman, and ultimately, they're the league that wins out at the top level, and then expands to have 2 leagues, and then 3 leagues, and then 4 leagues, as in 4 divisions, and then the game spreads professionally, with the Football League being the pinnacle of the game. And then obviously the rest, as they say, is history. But at the time the Football League is establishing itself, Rugby Union and Rugby League split in 1895. And Rugby League, which was the Northern Football Union at that time, wanted to go professional. They did go professional. And that was another challenge to the Football League. And Rugby Union decides to remain amateur, which is another reason why potentially Rugby League and football stay more northern sports, and then football being a little bit more organised structurally, and already having that league structure and having that unified, where the top league slowly expands south and then very rapidly expands south as time goes on, whereas Rugby League just lost out by being professional that little bit later, and so therefore the professional athletes are already playing football. And so that's where I think Rugby League, as the professional code of rugby at the time, comes second. Had Rugby League split from Rugby Union earlier than the Football League being set up, Rugby League would actually be the dominant professional sport in this country. 7 years is the difference maker. But that's that turning point. Had Rugby League gone professional before football and had a professional league structure before the Football League, if the RFL had been the first professional league, or the EFL, I have no doubt that Rugby League would have become the dominant professional sport in this country. Honestly, I think that defining moment at the end of the Victorian era in the 1880s, early 1890s, that period, that 7-8 year period, if Rugby League if the Northern Football Union split from rugby earlier, we're talking 5-6 years earlier, potentially Rugby League could have won the battle of hearts and minds with match-going fans, with professional players. Rugby League could have won as the professional sport that we say as the national sport, rather than being more of a niche professional sport. I generally believe that. And then things are different. Things become totally different globally on a further afield. And instead of Europe adopting association football as the professional sport of choice across the continent, it would have been Rugby League. And I do mean that. I generally mean that. That is how important that decision in 1888 by the 12 founding clubs of the Football League is, and then the rival clubs of the Football Alliance the year later. The other defining moment is that meeting in Huddersfield where rugby splits into two codes. If that meeting takes place a decade earlier, I think Rugby League is also, because Rugby League, the northern clubs were working class. And if that split between Rugby League and Rugby Union happens a decade earlier, in 1885 rather than 1895, let's say, and predates the Football League, we're having a different conversation over 130, 140 odd years later. It's 130 years that we've had professional rugby league. We would be having a different conversation, because football wins the battle by having two professional leagues before that meeting in Huddersfield in 1895 and the split. If that meeting happens before the Football League and the Football Alliance is set up, Rugby League wins, because it was only the one league rather than two rival leagues having a battle, and it would win. And then the debate around when British industrialists are invited over to Europe to set up factories and help finance sports clubs, they would have chosen Rugby League. That's my opinion. That's my thought process and my theory. We're talking a very small time frame, really, where these sports are getting established professionally. Because rugby's played over in Europe, and that split, I think, definitely the working class nature of rugby league as well. I think we could have had a different trajectory of global sport, and we wouldn't be talking about a FIFA Football World Cup. we'll be talking about a Rugby League World Cup where you've got all these nations around the world playing. We will be talking about different World Cup. Honestly, we're completely discussing a different World Cup. I still think we have the same size stadiums that we have. Like, we would have massive stadiums in Manchester and Liverpool and London and Birmingham and the West and Bristol and Southampton and Hull and Newcastle and up in Scotland. But I think that is the key moment. Those two key moments, 7 years apart. If they other way around, it's rugby league that wins. Honestly, and that cricket would still be cricket. Rugby union would still be rugby union, and would have still turned professional later on, or maybe would have folded as a sport because players wanted to get paid. And it's later on that rugby league starts changing the rules and reducing the number of players and bringing in, 6 tackles and back 10 and play the ball and the scrum being different, the line out disappearing. We may not have had rugby union as the dominant rugby code. Oh yeah, and of course now, yes. There's been talk about having like sort of a hybrid kind of format, and obviously with R360 now, no one's talking about R360 anymore. It's sort of died to death. I think they were a flash in the pan. They've shot themselves in the foot by postponing. I don't think R360 actually again gets played. I really don't. I think there was a lot of hype, and I don't know what Mike Tyndall's getting out of being the public face of R360, apart from a lot of criticism, and he's costing himself, a lot of brownie points, basically. In regards to what ultimately happens is, association football wins out because it's organised and structured earlier. But at the same time, we end up where we end up, and the rest is history. But if the split of rugby happens before the Professional Football League and the Football Alliance are set up as rival leagues, Rugby League splits away from Rugby Union first, I think that the narrative is different. I still think, as I say, we'll have these stadiums in London, Manchester, Birmingham, across the country, Scotland, and all that. But I think Rugby League wins out, and then the debate is different. And then when it gets to Europe and South America and gets played, I think Argentina and and the European countries would still win those World Cups. I mean, look at Argentina and Uruguay. They play rugby union. So obviously it's a thing, but they play football. But if Rugby League wins out, those rich industrialists say, these Rugby League, we're making a lot of money here. We're going to take this game overseas. It's very profitable. We're going to establish this as, I believe it becomes a national sport. And we may then see American football not become a thing because it comes off rugby league a little bit and rugby union in a sense. It evolves from that. But then the Americans might like rugby league more than American football. Who knows? It's a hypothetical. If we had a time machine and could just swap those two moments around, and then come back to the present day and go, wow, what's happened? We'll be having the same debates about a manager getting sacked and a bad contract to players on, and a club board in disarray and club in financial trouble, and a scandal here, a player scandal there, poor refereeing, the video ref failing, the tech. We would still be having the same debates, just a different sport is the dominant sport in this country. We'll still be complaining about the style of play we're playing at international level because we're not very good at it at the moment. And there's, again, talk about pressure on will Sean Wayne be the manager for the World Cup, the head coach. We'll be still having those debates. It's just, it'll be about rugby league rather than football. That's my viewpoint. I think those early formations of organising sport professionally, I think, has a profound impact on the sports we see today. Weird question, but speaking of rugby, have you heard of the Rayburn Shield? Raven Shield. That sounds very like Australians tend to call trophies shields when it comes to their domestic competitions. And so I'm gonna have a little. I believe I've heard of it. Let's have a look. Is it the Raven Shield? Well, there's actually a school in Liverpool which is named Raven, and there's Raven, a company in Glasgow. Its head office is in Glasgow as a corporate office. Raven Shield. Let's have a look. There's a rugby union trophy. Similar to a boxing world title, New Zealand's Ranfurly Shield. Okay, let's have a look. I've heard when the league leaders shield that's more of an Australian and New Zealand. Rayburn Place, England, Scotland. The women's version is the Utrecht Shield. Okay, by the same format. Rugby Union Challenge Trophy. 27th of March 1871. Okay. Okay. Oh, I see. So anyone can win it. Oh, right. Okay. The Raven Shield. Apparently, it gets awarded every time it's played for. Oh my God. It's been awarded 219 times. And the last time a match that was the Raven Shield, where the holders were challenged by someone else. France beat New Zealand on the 16th of November last year, and then England beat France this year on the 8th of February in the Six Nations. So England currently, they've not officially been challenged for it. I see. Okay. Right, I see now. Okie dokie. Right. So it's a rugby union trophy based on a title holder concept, similar to a boxing. Okay, so the World Championship in boxing, right? Okay. Named after Rayburn Place, the site of the first international between England and Scotland, the Shield adds a dynamic layer of competition to international rugby. A women's version is the Utrecht Shield, where the first women's international. Okay, fine. Okay, since the title is contested in every match the holder plays, lower ranked nations have a real chance to claim it. For instance, Romania once held the Shield despite never reaching the World Cup knockout stages. Oh, wait, Romania have held it. Increased match intensity feels like every time a match carries extra weight, the defending team has something to protect while challengers are highly motivated. This dynamic can elevate the intensity of otherwise routine fixtures. Oh wow. Munster won as a province, won it. Wow. Frequent title changes. Like Rugby World Cup, the Raven Shield changes hands 99, 6 teams: Wales, Samoa, Scotland, New Zealand, France, and Australia. And the following year, it changed hands several more times. Blah, 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 blah. I see. I get it now. So England haven't lost a game since. No, that means England haven't lost a game since they beat France in the Six Nations. So England are undefeated at this point, which is why they're the holders since February last year. So the last time it was won was 8th of February when England won it, and England have not lost a test match since then, which means they've held it for 162 days. Wow. 162 days. Wow, okay. Most Shield defences: New Zealand, South Africa, England, Ireland, Australia, France, Wales, Scotland, Japan. Okay. Argentina, Romania, Samoa. Oh, wow. This is mad. See also. That is it. That's really interesting. That's mad. So let's have a look at the Utrecht Shield, which is the women's version, which I think is probably held by England at this point. First one is France. Most recent is England. So let's have a look. So England obviously won that during the World Cup, obviously. List of Shield holders. Netherlands lost to France. So Netherlands obviously are the first ones to play for it because it's the Utrecht Shield. France won. Netherlands won the second game. France won the third. Great Britain, which obviously becomes England, United States, England, France, England, New Zealand, England, France, New Zealand, England, New Zealand, England, is that Ireland winning? Ireland, England, Wales 1-1. France against Italy. Italy 1-1. France, Wales, England. Wow, it's an interesting one. Most shield defences. Okay, England come top, New Zealand, France, Ireland, Canada, Wales, Italy, Netherlands, United States, Australia. Oh wow, that's quite cool. That's actually quite cool. That lesser nations have actually won that one. That's kind of cool. I like that. I think it's a lineal world title. That's how the creators trying to push it to be recognised. They've both been going on a very, very long time. I didn't realise that was a thing. That's amazing, actually. That's actually quite cool. I think we need to promote things like that a little bit more, because that's something that gets overlooked. I think the fact that England haven't lost a Test match, for example, since February the 8th. That's really interesting. That's really interesting. And it's a great concept. It is a great concept. And I think we should push that concept a little bit more, actually. It's kind of cool. I didn't realise that. Anyway, I've been rambling on now for 3 hours. That's a real cool concept. I think it's a great concept. There's been a lot of challenges and title defenses and teams competing for it. Honestly, I think it's a great concept. And I think it should get more promotion. But these are little things that you find out. But the fact there's actually a Rayburn school, there's a Rayburn company name, it's a really interesting concept, like the women's game as well, the Utrecht Shield. It shows how far women's rugby union has come. The first ever Utrecht Shield was the Dutch against the French, and they were the challengers who kept swapping over by challenging each other for this particular. I think it does. Yeah, I think any sport needs stuff like that. I think that's pretty cool. It is a pretty cool concept. But anyway, I want to end the stream there. I've rambled on long enough. The weather is still outside. The weather is absolutely frightful, and they're not delightful. But no, it's a really interesting concept, and I think a concept World Rugby should have a look at expanding upon, and the various unions as well. I think it's an undervalued, very undervalued concept. I mean, it's been going a very long time. I mean, look at it, 1871. It's been going a long time between nations competing for it. I think World Rugby and the domestic unions need to look at trying to really promote and develop and showcase it and what it means, and actually giving a bit more promotion to this international award. I think that would be a definite boost for the game. Definite boost for the game. And the concept is brilliant. The fact it's been going since 1871, that's a fantastic, absolutely fantastic concept. And obviously the fact it can change hands so many times in a very short space, especially during the World Cup, is insane. And look at some of the nations that have competed for it. They're not necessarily the top nations, but they've competed for it. It just shows how rugby union as a sport has evolved, and the competitiveness has changed, time from time. But anyway, I'm going to leave that there. Thank you very much for all the questions. Again, discussed a lot, and obviously the World Championship darts is getting really interesting, and obviously it's grown as a tournament, and people are like a bit dubious about expanding it to the amount of size it is. Same with the World Cup, Football World Cup next year, but it seems to be a trend in international sport. But anyway, thank you very much for watching, and I'll have some more content for you all very, very soon.